Hello, and welcome to my outside workshop speech. And the speech I decided to cover was done by Justin Pritikin on the YOLO lifestyle. And Justin Pritikin, just to begin with, he was actually somebody who I had the honor of getting to know, because he assisted in teaching the basketball team that I was a part of early in middle school. And I think it was when he was a freshman in high school, or sometime around then. It's kind of hazy. He had been diagnosed with leukemia, and it was in this speech, particularly, is when he really talked about that and to change people's perspective on how they view like small moments in life, say like a handshake or taking pictures with somebody. To really appreciate that, and I very much did enjoy the speech. It was actually shared on Twitter by my freshman year world history teacher, and the left girls lacrosse coach for the high school I went to, and that's how I got to check it out. And why I liked it was because we view people like on the more physical side of being strong when it comes to dealing with cancer, and what he actually really much emphasized was the mental, emotional, and degrading side, that it really took a toll on him. And the elements of a good 4-part intro that he employed was that he had a lot of hand gestures, and he was walking around showing fluid movement. He was looking around the crowd at people and keeping them engaged, not just focusing on one particular area. And he was adding correlation to, say, people and just like saying normal things. Say, like, he was making relation with the audience. And so he was talking, like, the logical organization of the speech and transition was that he would segue from, say, like, parts in his life, say when he was first diagnosed with leukemia, and the majority chunk was talking about his experience and what he went through, and it was very much applying to the emotional factor of gripping people's attention. And the physical presentation of the speech in terms of eye contact, vocal dynamics, and gesture and delivery was very strong. I think I noticed only once or twice that he'd trip on his words just a little bit, but aside from that, it was a very powerful delivery. And to digress from that, and the concluding message that he talked about was to appreciate, say, small moments. They correlate, like, at one point in the speech, he'd talked about how when he was laying in hospital bed and he had the fear of like falling asleep and not waking up, he talked about how he'd looked at a picture of his dog and forced that image into his head before he went to sleep. So it'd be, they say, if possible, it'd be the last image if he were to die at that time. Which, that really hit. And my brother, now that he owns a puppy dog, and I can see the side of that, and it really hit the audience. The evidence that I saw or heard that led me to believe that the speaker did or did not accept the message to the audience, I would absolutely have to say that his message was a straight shot, and with I wouldn't say buttering up, but say getting the audience really worked in with his emotional story is what really delivered the final blow of his speech and the message to appreciate every singular moment of life, and to talk about how it's a gift and to fight for it if you're willing to. And he talked about during his procedures how he'd really kept those, like, the emotions and thoughts bubbled up that he was deterring, like, mentally and physically, because he'd mentioned that he was 17 when this first happened to him. And so he also strived for a sub-message talking about how, say, just to be open with people, because that's how you truly get the support and help you need. And to wrap up, if I were a coach for the speaker, and what advice I'd give him to improve the overall presentation, would be when talking about the very emotional side of his life story, at some point along that, maybe break the ice to add a little bit of division, so it takes the audience out of that, and then proceed afterwards, but so they don't get too vacuumed into the whole emotional factor of your speech, and so that there's more focus in the overall message that you're sending, because, as I said, like, a sizable chunk was of his life story, but that's that's the smallest finite detail I could really point out. I was getting really sucked into it, and he was very passionate about like his story and like the whole message. And overall, if I would give this a rating, I'd say it was a 9.5 out of 10. And it gave me some kind of personal closure because I'd heard about this. They started a whole movement for him in my town of New Egypt, which is where I've lived most of my life. It was a thing called Just Insanity, which was raising awareness for leukemia and cancer. The basketball team of my school was the one who sponsored it. And that wraps up my speech. I hope you take something away from this, and I'll include a link into the class discussion. Thank you.